Sharp. Right. Stephen, it's all yours, mate.
Really are.
Yep.
Welcome everyone. Is everybody here? Oh, I guess they are. So the next item on the agenda is economic development and community facilities. 22.1.5. It's on page 91 on mine. 92 on the run sheet. 12:10 p.m. So we're a little bit late. Grants policy review. Welcome Alex to take us through this.
So this is the update to the grants policy for the next round opening in March. I won't go into the contents of the workshops again because you've all been through them twice now.
Yeah.
But the summary of the discussions was attached to the report. As mentioned at the time, this area of budgetary or consultative implications that have been separated out and programmed. And what we're presenting today is some of the more straightforward and simpler changes that could be made immediately. The main piece of feedback we had was to make the process clearer and easier for the community to understand. That's the reason that the policy has now been separated out into a technical document and a guidance document for the community. That's very much a draft version as I pulled it together to illustrate what it may look like. The next step of that document will be to hand it over to the engagement team to work with the community to finalise it with what they need. In that same vein of making it clearer and easier to understand, we've simplified the criteria, as you'll see. Again, there's another attachment that's detailed all of that out for you. We've adjusted it so there's one clear set of criteria for each grant for the community to refer to. And we've added a focus on wellbeing overall rather than just on economic wellbeing in response to feedback. And that will simply be noting it in the reports, so it'll be pretty clear to see what balance you have either in front of you or funded at the end. And during those discussions and workshops, we discussed having a grants workshop at the start of each term with each board. 3 boards expressed an interest, so there's just some room in the policy now for any outcomes of those workshops to be added to the criteria in the future. So before I hand it back for questions, I just really wanted to reiterate that I'm conscious the majority of the discussions we had in those workshops, some of those bigger meatier items have been programmed for the future, and that what we're presenting today is just everything straight to the
Thank you. We'll go with Shirley first so we don't forget. Shirley?
Sorry, I'm switching between screens, so it takes a wee while to get to the mute. Just a couple of questions. In the appendix on page, it's appendix 2 anyway, it mentions under the promotions grant criteria that it should directly enhance visitor experience. And like some of the other things, there seems to be quite a strong tourist emphasis, and I think that word visitor maybe would be better expressed as user experience so that it includes the locals as well as visitors, because a lot of the events we run are actually for our own locals, and particularly when it comes to grants, we want to be doing things for our own people. So just wondering if that word could perhaps be changed. And 2 other things, I've had some feedback from the community, people who do apply for grants, and they want to make sure that you allow for time for extra information to be gathered and submitted when more information is required. That didn't happen last time, and they missed out on getting funding, which leads on to the next point, which is to allow groups to make a profit in order to build up resources with a view to becoming self-sustaining. And I know of one group in particular who had to use all the resources that they had been trying to build up to be self-sustaining to get them through that 3-month hiatus. That was the fault of our council, not actually their fault for anything, just because we changed the timing. So it had a double effect for that particular group, and then they had COVID on top of that and had to cancel a lot of their events that were fundraising. So I guess the 3 points are that we should think about changing that visitor word to user word experience, allowing time for extra information to be submitted and allowing groups to make a profit until they can become self-sustaining. Thank you.
Thank you. The first point, I've just going to go and change that one. It's in the appendix, so I can answer that one without bringing it back up. The second one, I'll need to take that back to the team. And same with the third point as well, I'll note that back to the team.
Thank you.
Thank you. When you on the third point, which is talking about making a profit, there is an issue that I think that the community is a little bit upset about, or even the community board was upset about, and so much as that when organisations are making a profit and then off going out and giving grants to other people in the community or other organisations in the community. And I kind of think that from our community board, the Civic Valley, they found that quite unacceptable. Yeah. So, and I see that's still a soft point, like it doesn't actually.
I put it softly into the policy and put it into the guidance document as well. But what became clear when I went and got some advice on that is that we already have the ability with the way the policy is worded to decline those applications when that's in there. So as a first step, we can adjust the language to show it's discouraged. The step after that would be to outright ban it. But what that might start to bring in is in the accounting process and how we would start looking and doing things like accounting like a box and what that might bring up. So that's the way I tackled it here, but I'm very happy to go and make it stronger if that's what you like.
Well, I think that it kind of does need to be a little bit stronger. I agree with what Shirley's saying. If it's leading down the path to self-sustainability, then that's fine. But if you have another organisation that then get a grant to someone else in the community, I'm not so sure that that's a good look.
We can strengthen it.
I just think in that particular circumstance, it wasn't that situation with a major funder for that event determined that something had to be given back to the community in that particular circumstance. Part of the major funders.
Well, even if it was highlighted at the start, what who they potentially proposed to give any profits to as a grant, that might help. But as a funder at the community board level, you kind of need to know that. I think you should know that because you might not be in favour of who they are going to give the funds to, and it might be outside what our criteria already is.
If I may as well, that what another funder requires of an applicant doesn't put the owner on the council or the ratepayer to fund it. That's an arrangement between the applicant and the other funder, not necessarily for the council to fund.
So, sorry, I don't understand.
So in the instance I think Lindley's talking about is that if the major funder of that event requires them to give something back to the community, the onus is between those two parties, not for council to meet that requirement. That would be an arrangement with council rather than between the applicant and the other funder.
So you're saying you don't think they need to identify who they potentially give a grant to?
No, I'm just saying that the onus is on the ratepayer to fund those grants. That is an arrangement between the party and whoever else they're talking to. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I anticipate we would only be funding certain aspects anyway. We're not funding a grant for them to then give to another organisation in the first place. Is it just the perception of?
So.
And I think I know which one you're talking about,
Yeah,
but there's a
surplus
and they've uplifted a grant from council and there's a surplus and they're then giving it to an organisation within the community.
Exactly, yeah. So they're potentially, they're getting funding at the front end for the project, but they know that historically that they're making significant return, so they will then distribute to who they choose in the community, which might not be this, that might not meet the criteria of the initial funder, which is a community group. Yeah.
The way it's worded currently into the policies, where a group makes a profit and seeks to return the investment into the community, it is preferred that excess funding is returned to council for redistribution through the contestable process. Would you like that to now read it as required?
So what you're saying
is it, in that, I'm reading between the lines, in that situation, you might need start-up funding to allow the process to happen rather than a grant. And then it goes back to council, back to the grants board.
There is an element of that, but there's also an element of saying, well, why do they need to constantly go back and ask for more funding when it's an organisation that's run maybe across the
That's
district?
right.
And then why don't they
Why have they got start-up funding?
make it self-sustainable by putting funds aside?
I think you need to be careful. You look at examples and it may be building up a nest egg so that they can get towards self-sufficiency, but then, oh, we've got a bit of money, we're going to give it to this. And rather than have a blanket ban or say the money has to go back, I think if we keep it as it is, but we're awake to it and go, well, hang on, you got 100 grand in the bank. You know, why are we
Yes,
still
but
funding you?
I'll talk about one that happened in our community, because was that the Petiroa community came to us for cavalcade money on several fronts and got 4,000 from a promotions grant, 4,000 from the community trust of the Minitoto fund, and then made quite a substantial profit. But the community lost their ability. It still will be hopefully reinvested back into the community. Don't get me wrong, but the ratepayer funded the startup of all that process and never, you know, like it left it to some people left the sour taste in the mouth because that money and that never got disclosed. The profit margin never got disclosed back to our community board, which had effectively funded $8,000 of the development of it. So we don't know how much profit it was and where it got spent. But yet the ratepayer has an obligation. You know what I mean? So that was one that's very profitable, and they did a very good job. Nothing wrong with the outfit. But
I just think that we need to be aware of it, because if you take that one step further, that funding that, say, the cavalcade distributed in the community, that might have gone to a project that has implications for the community board when they take it over.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, you know.
In our situation, it'd be like, can we have that $8,000 what it's worth, and then can we pay part of the community aspect of it back or half it? Because some of it would have been advertising, marketing, or security, or something like that for a purpose, no matter what it was, whether it's a rail trail triathlon. But the money that the community board never really.
We're getting.
Hopefully, it got paid back in the community.
Through you, Stephen, if we go down that path of saying it must, are we getting into an area where we could almost be accused of doing what do you call guarantees against loss rather than grants? And I think there was some reason we couldn't do that. So when I was at Central Lakes Trust, I liked guarantees against loss because it avoided this problem.
Yeah.
But when I suggested it here some years ago, it was no, that puts us in some queer territory we're not supposed to go.
We would want to take legal advice because you can't underwrite, but it doesn't mean there's not a way to do things.
Yeah, well,
And I guess that becomes one of the questions, and it's not about trying to stymie things, but I guess it's about accountability of ratepayer spend.
Yeah.
Is what you need to be.
Yeah.
watching out for.
I'm not suggesting it's a must. That's a step too far.
so can we have a fund out of the grants policy that is a start-up fund that must be paid back in total? Like if you need to start up something, you need 10,000 up front to do that. Can that be a part of a policy we make? The lots of the cavalcade, if you had to have something to go, well, there's the money that you can download and draw down, goes to the board, goes to a council, drawn down for a specific event, and of the profit, once it comes in afterwards, it has to be paid back in full.
But that is underwriting.
I think also you're talking about something outside of the soft review of the grants policy.
Yeah.
And it's probably an LTP discussion.
Yeah.
I just, as one other point, sorry, Stephen, was that we might want to think about if we are talking about self-sustainability, that we understand what is that, and that is agreement in issuing the grant between the parties of what self-sustainability is, because you could end up in a situation where an applicant never becomes self-sustaining because they're always just making it bigger and bigger and bigger or something else. So you want to have an agreement about what that looks like.
Isn't one of the options to make sure that as part of any application, that there's a section that deals with any, I won't use the word profit, any surplus after the event, because a lot of the times I think the application comes in on the basis saying our income is uncertain. To run the event, this is what we need to have in place.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it not be able to have something in the application process that said that in the event that there is a surplus, that then there is some agreed way of how that surplus is distributed, retained or whatever.
Grant paid back.
Or which could include the grant being paid back or not, because I think the last thing we want to do is in a situation where ratepayer money is given to one organisation to effectively go and give it to others. Now, when you're running an event, that's not quite how that works, because the ratepayer funding is I would contend is being spent up front at the front end.
Yeah.
If that then makes a profit, is there a connection to the two? And the only thing is, if we choose to make one, there is. If not, there's not. And don't complain about what they do with the process, because they're an incorporated society or some sort of group you know something about, you know what their aims and objectives are, and you should be able to rely on them to do what they should do. But so I think as long as the policy is worded in such a way that it doesn't stop you from making that connection when it's appropriate. Because in some cases, and I'm reluctant to use it, but I'll take the Blossom Festival, given its history and what it's been able to achieve by the fact that it's got money on the front end to run an event. And the proceeds it's able to turn that into have meant that they've been able to invest on behalf of the community in other things. And I guess go back and say this Centennial Swimming Pool in the first place, that's what got built. That's how that happened. Why would we ever want to stop that? I don't think we would. But as long as we know that's what's going to happen at the front end, then you can make your grant accordingly.
But do you think you should know what that is?
I think I think you should.
Yeah,
I think you can ask.
Effectively, though, this policy has meaning that Blossom Festival is no longer getting access to any grant funding through the VCB. Because we try and generate profits to return to selected things, and secondly, that we have, because we've built up surpluses over the last 10 years, we've actually in a situation where it can be perceived we don't need the money. But those surpluses under currently will be, unless there's significant changes in income streams, mainly brought through by increasing pricing at the gate, those surpluses will not be existing in 3 years' time.
Which is kind of the example I was thinking of, because I think part of the major sponsors, because it was something being returned to the community.
Now, one of the attractions, one of the community's attractions to become involved with Blossom Festival is the fact is they can see that the proceeds are going to particular projects, whether it be Side Park or so, and that's traditionally what it was always there for. Now, I don't have a problem with Blossom Festival, as an example, retaining its surpluses, because it needs to, because if it's an issue we cancelled, we lost $75,000.
Yeah. Okay, so I agree with what you're saying. It's just that if they indicated if there was a surplus, or you indicated there was a surplus and you indicated where it might go, then that might tick all the boxes. If for example, you saw that say Blossom Festival was going to donate money or give a grant to an organisation, you then had to come up with a whole lot more funds to finish a project, potentially would come back to maybe the community board in that area. So therefore, I'm not saying you're creating a rod for your own back, but you're causing some issues that you didn't foresee when you gave the grant initially.
We fund, I'll keep out its own tribute, it's a classic example of where sometimes you might put some money into something that 2 or 3 years comes back, to haunt you because that group doesn't, it could be garden planting, for instance. Yeah, I tell you, you've got to be conscious, but I should actually not talk about Blossom Festival when completely conflicted on.
I think that we've flagged it, and if it was noted that those questions were asked in the grants process, I think that we could take a highlight where the funds were going. I think that ticks some of the boxes, maybe not all of them. Has anybody got any? I've got Shirley, isn't it?
Stephen, can I check with that we asked for, and in those respects, we can look at their financials and see where the money has been spent. So, does this grants policy allow for that? Because I'm pretty sure that promotions would also have to report back on the previous spending where it goes, and they have to give back what they have spent in which area. So would that not solve your problem?
You're a bit garbled there, Shirley. I didn't quite understand.
I'm getting it trouble from me as well. It's really hard to speak.
Shirley, I think what you said was you clarified that in the process already there's a report back of the financial information, and there's also a requirement to pay back any money that wasn't spent through the process. And then you check which is both accurate, and then you check if that was relevant to the discussion today.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, so then how could you become self-sustaining if you have to give back the money that you'd made?
Well, the policy doesn't actually require these things. The policy is being quite deliberately, doesn't ever prevent funding. It identifies these issues so that you can still make the decision based on them.
Okay,
That's different.
yep, I'm with you. Sorry.
And you don't have to give back money that you've made.
Yeah,
You have to give back
misunderstood.
the grant that you have issued for a specific reason if it's not being used to give a portion of that back.
Cool. Tracy?
So I had a couple of just word things that were not worded correctly, so just semantics. I don't know whether that's, I can talk to you. Do you want that here? Or? So page 98, where it says retrospective expenses, funding will not be awarded in retrospect. It should just be funding will not be awarded retrospectively. Take that in there. Page 99, we talked about, I asked a question, can the applicant seek to hold the funding for a year? So I think it refers to if something happens and they can't use it that year, can they hold it for a year? I mean, I guess this year is a classic example. There's events being cancelled all the time. If someone has been given a grant for something and it's is that on a case-by-case basis, or can they hold it pending the event the following year or next month or whatever?
And that's on a case-by-case basis. I didn't change this wording from the existing policy, and that's how it operates now. I can update that wording to make it clearer.
I don't know what everyone thinks. It's just,
Oh, when you think what's happening in the community at the moment, I think that's appropriate. Really.
yeah, I would like to think that you could actually just hold it over, but that's my personal thoughts.
So we had a first example of our productions and what happened day before the event, and there was an update to the VCB. So we did it quite informally, and then it was just the status updates. So the board had oversight and were happy with that money to be carried forward. So if that process would work for everyone, would continue that.
Okay. Page 99, again, awarding of partial grants. I've got, instead of the word will, it should be may. And I'll take, what is it? Council will stipulate what part of the project or activity the grant is to be used for. I think that should be a may. Will is may gives you guys a bit more flexibility as opposed to being very prescriptive.
Because you can have it costs, can't you?
Yeah, so I mean, actually, you might not want to stipulate what part of the grant or the
If
activity.
the whole thing is applicable to the grant,
Yeah.
it's just, that's the,
So just change out will to may. And I guess the other thing was the tiered approach to accountability. Is that just, and it's probably just a question for me, is that just so that it manages staff time better, because smaller, I guess every grant's important. When we're talking about grants, it's all important.
Yeah.
Whether it's 1,000 or 20,000.
It's more the community's time than staff time.
Okay.
And it's we've got a 3-tier system. We didn't put it into the policy itself because we're still adjusting what those finances are. But essentially, if it's less than $1,000, you're right. And then it's bigger, we need more. So.
Okay, well, I'm happy with that. It's just a comment. And the other thing is, this is just a bit of a random. Should we have an independent person to sit on that, in that, when we're doing grants? Someone who's, because we are all can be all very close to some of the grants, and you know, we all quite often will say that we've got a conflict. But is there someone and something that we could do that appoint someone for the grants policies? Pardon? Oh.
No.
No.
Do you mean at the recommendation phase with staff, or do you mean at the decision-making phase with the members?
No, probably more at the recommendation with staff to help them along, so that's all.
Could I suggest that that's something that gets parked into a later date? Because I think as we come into the next long-term plan, grants are going to be reviewed in quite a lot of detail, including the increased discussion around specific events granting. And so it's possibly a good time to look at stuff like that.
Cool.
We're tidying things up too. The typo on page 92, it should be practice with a C, not an S.
I looked that up and actually you're right.
Here we go, here we go.
I looked that up, I looked it up too.
I was thinking Barry Henry.
Actually, you go and have a look at the dictionary and it's actually with an S. I
don't agree with you.
Right.
Because there's two different.
Here you go,
two
you'll
different
have
types of practice, with a C or with an S. Have a look.
Order. You want a bet?
That's why she sits beside me.
I actually crossed it out because I was embarrassed that I didn't notice why the two, so have a look.
Not a verb.
All right, have you two finished arguing? or-
Yeah, you used to be a pain, Gillespie.
On page 92.
Order, please.
To go back to the, are we going to get refunds? Just a general question that might be for later on, but to flag. If an organisation gives $2,000 back, does that go back into the mighty kitty, or does it just go back into the grant so that there's more money in the grant pool for next year, or does it just disappear back into the, the consolidated fund or whatever? Just food for thought.
That was an answer.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So if we haven't spent all our money, and because we essentially target rate for these activities, that's the surplus, so to speak, hits your reserves.
It's the reserves, doesn't go back into the grants.
If it's the grants reserves.
It's the grants reserves, right? Thank you.
Right.
And what if it was only the first allocation for the year?
Oh, then it hits the, sorry,
Yes,
that's
so
at the
it's within
end of the
that year.
financial year.
Yeah.
If it was year after the first round and we got it back, it was available for the second round, so be it.
Cool. So we got that in place. Page 110 of the agenda, it says under what is a contestable grants process, it said that be considered and funding allocated as fairly as possible in accordance with council's criteria and principles. And I wonder if it wouldn't hurt to add and within allocated budgets, just to remind people that we've got so much in the bucket to spend. Doesn't hurt to remind that. And just the line after that, council is made up of 4 community boards. I think we have to probably say that that kind of implies that that's all council is. So maybe council has 4 community boards as council as well.
This may be a question for Leanne, but if we roll a grant over and you don't draw it down for a year, does it not affect that budget in the next year when it comes to grants?
In a perfect world, and we have pretty good staff here, we typically carry that forward, that unspent, so that it doesn't. So we recognise that we haven't spent it this year, and when we come to council in August, give or take, that is part of the carry forward. So it does not impact. It does impact on the budget in that it looks like you've overspent, but it's, again, it's taken out of this.
It's been documented, itemised.
Okay.
All right, anything further? Okay, recommendations on page 91, if I've got it right. Receive the report, approve the updated grant policies. And I guess that's the proviso that you've noted some of those changes.
Yeah, we'll be making them as.
Practice with a C. Denial.
Mover? Oh, I still argue. Tamer, second it?
Not me.
Nigel, all in favour?
We had who's right, who's wrong.
I love it. All right, thank you, Stephen. Yes.
No, I'm right.
Moving on to page 131, this is the asset management policy. Quinton, what up?
Asset management.
Looking.
Floor's yours.
Cool, thank you. Good afternoon all. I'll take the report as read. Council's current asset management policy was adopted in 2014. The asset management policy sets out key principles, responsibilities and council's approach to asset management. The proposed policy has been aligned to the 2018 asset management maturity assessment and council's outcomes and priorities. The 2021 asset management policy was presented to the Audit and Risk Committee on December 3rd, 2021. The Audit and Risk Committee recommended that Council approve the 2021 asset management policy with minor amendments which have been incorporated into the attached policy. The recommendation is that Council receives the report and accepts the level of significance and approves the 2021 asset management policy. I'll hand back to the Chair for any questions.
Thank you. Questions, anybody? I only had one, and that was on page 137. of the agenda. Is that, you've got the agenda in front of you, or are you working with the? That's okay. Asset management requirements is the heading. It's page 3 of the policy. We've got demand management review activity, demand forecasts, demand management strategies and asset growth investment strategies at least 3 yearly. Should that be timed with the LTP? Is that necessary when it says 3 yearly that it's got an LTP ring to it?
Yeah, so that's through the development of the activity, for the development of the activity management plan,
So
which are in the same cycle.
It'll
as-
happen anyway. We don't have to have it in there.
Correct.
Great, thank you. Do I have anybody else? In that case then, who wishes to move A and B? Taylor does. Who wishes to second that? Stephen does. Any further discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Taking us to page 144, the fraud, bribery and corruption policy. Leanne.
Good authors.
Yeah.
Sorry, this one's back up on me. So I'm presenting this on behalf of Gabby, who's not with us anymore. So we took the fraud, bribery and corruption policy to auditors late last year, and other than adding in a ramification section as per point 2 in the background of the report, they recommended that council adopt the fraud, bribery and corruption policy. So minimal change. Hand it back to the chair, to be honest.
Councillors, questions? In that case, somebody willing to move A and B? Neil is willing to move, Martin is seconding. Any further discussion? All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Sandy moves things along. Page 100.
Stephen, get closer and do a right turn.
Always the way to go.
Financial report, Leanne.
I've lost Anne hasn't got here yet, so we might have caught up on time and she may not have got to the meeting yet, but I'll.
Do you wish to delay this?
No, I'll
No,
take
you've got it
the
covered.
read, I've been through it and checked it, so I think my brain will remember what we wrote in it. This is for the period ending 30 November 2021. And you can see where we're sitting at the moment, we're slightly behind on our surplus for our 5 months, primarily with land sales income. And land sales income hard to time it right, but we have confidence by the end of the year. The sales go through, the titles go through, and affect the activity costs.
It's just time.
Really timely. Expenditure, we're also favourable, and again, part of that will reflect cost of land, the sales, and then a lot of timing with the different activities such as professional fees that aren't a smooth 1/12. We often budget it that way because we have no idea. It's kind of that need-based costs. That's P&L, and I'll hand over to Anne to cover the profit and loss by activity. So I'll jump in here, just about timing.
No, that's okay. So you've talked about the 4.7 million in Dunstan Park. We've got a year-to-date 10.9 million spent in CapEx, which is 17% of the revised budget of 27.1 million. We've still got 16 million to spend. Council property and facility has favourable 3.4 million because of the timing of the Cromwell Town Centre project, and the Cromwell pool replacement heat pump is contributing to the 1 million variance in parks and recreation. Three Waters variance of 9 million is due to the timing of the major construction projects, which we've got Clyde Wastewater, Alexandra Northern Reservoir and Pump Station, as well as the Lake Dunstan Water Supply. The reserves funds table at the 30th of June 21, the reserve funds had a balance of 7.0 million, with the expected balance 30th of June 2022 of 10.7 deficit. So we'll be looking at getting the funding for this in the near future.
Very shortly.
Very shortly.
I was meeting with our Treasury advisor today. We will start withdrawing that down shortly.
Okay. Questions, councillors?
Yep, I've got a dumb question I'd like to ask.
No, so-
Probably going through my head a little bit. So when we look at the financials, and that's a very good record of the financials, how would we know, as councillor sitting here representing the ratepayers, that that's actually, that we can balance that with what we've got in reserves or in the bank? Mr McKinley's looking at the sky.
Sorry?
I can see Mr McKinley's looking surprised. So in other words, we can't see what reserves we've got in a bank account to match what we're looking at here.
We can easily, we actually attach as appendix 1 the reserves. And the reserves essentially match our cash. So the reserves will be 10 million in deficit. That means we've drawn down on our loans. So our cash will never be 10 million in deficit because we have to pay the bills. So it means we've drawn down on loans. So we could add another table, and like the reserves we always add, we've done that pretty much since I walked in the door. We could add in a balance sheet, and that way you'll see the cash flow as well. That would be suitable to you. We're happy to do that.
I kind of think that in our role, representing the ratepayers and what happens here financially, that we can look at this and understand this. Like I said, it's a good report, but can't really see that that matches what's sitting in a bank account anywhere.
We're happy to look at that. We're doing some work right at the moment with a consultant to try and get our finance system working, humming a bit better. And part of that would mean the annual report, for instance, would be so much easier to prepare. And if you think about our annual report, we report against FIS statements, financial impact statements, and we also have a cash flow and a balance sheet and all of those things. So if we can get that humming, we would actually like to be able to present, even if it's quarterly or 6 monthly mini annual report, so to speak, obviously not audited, but that would help you reconcile, because this report's kind of what we call against management accounting. It's managing the business from within the business. The annual report is looking externally and public facing. So we could do a combination of that to give you more assurance that would help. But it's not quite there yet.
Could I ask a question, Stephen, just for clarification? Yeah. Are you wanting sort of tangible evidence from the bank that what we say is there? Rather than our own tables of balance sheets?
I guess it's just some proof, some surety that we do have those reserves sitting somewhere that we say that are written in here as a report.
Is it anyone would proof be a bank statement?
A mini summary every quarter was probably do the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of committees I sit on will have, you know, Westpac account has $12,680.
Yeah.
Don't need to see bank statement.
And often they don't perfectly tie, because recognising we account by our bank is by actual cash in and out.
Yeah.
But we can easily look at that for you, and that would not be a problem.
Once we start getting some more reporting from John, we'll be able to specialise exactly what type of reports we can pull out. So we might be able to do a combination of the two to compare them.
Yeah. And I appreciate the timelines won't always be perfect, but
we can still certainly do that. And the other thing that will kick in soon as we draw down on debt, we'll have caveats around our reporting, because that's a standard requirement as part of our investment and liability policies that council adopted.
Okay, thank you.
And we can be confident on past, can't we, because of the audit that we do?
Correct. Our audits, 30 June, audit New Zealand, audit our financial statements, which includes our reserves, our cash flow, balance sheet, etc. So there's that assurity too. And if they don't match up, you would certainly hear about that from New Zealand.
Yes, once a year.
I appreciate that. We will look into this one, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, councillors? Someone want to remove the report be received?
Yes.
Thank you, Stephen. Seconded, Lindley. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, page 163, Council Mark Program. Welcome, Saskia. This is just simply updated and coming back to us following it's sitting on the table last year whilst I got some other data. So Saskia, the floor's yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll take this read. Just a couple of minor comments from me. You'll see that the mayor's report is attached, as agreed at the November meeting. The mayor has had some discussions with around New Zealand, and feedback is attached. And in a moment, the mayor may wish to comment on his report. Since the November meeting, I've had a good discussion with LG&Z around the program and the time, and you'll see that I've reflected some comments in the report there. They don't recommend to go ahead in election year, and I've covered that in the report. And when I talked to them, they said ideally it would be early in a new term. Once the council's embedded and they've got working together and understanding of their governance roles. But in conjunction with the reform underway in the sector, you'll see there is a recommendation in there to maybe look at this again in 2023, towards the end of 2023. My final comment is, when I was talking to LG&Z, they did also say they asked councils to commit to a second review. So the first review is approximate cost of 26,000 plus disbursements, and then in 3 years' time, the process would be a similar cost adjusted for inflation. So I'll hand it to the chair, who may wish to come to his report.
Thank you. I'm not going to comment on my report because I was very dedicated at just cutting and pasting what was said to me rather than putting any opportunity for inflection from myself in it. Okay, the last time we did this is quite an important, over paper is important, but this is important. The last time we did this, we went around the room, and I probably think I wouldn't mind doing that again, actually, just unless anyone has any questions of either myself as on my bit or Saskia on her bit. We'll do that first if there's any questions, and then we might just go around the room and have a wee general chat. No questions? No. Stephen, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking, just looking at what I wrote when I read this. So let's not say that. I was thinking initially that it seems like a good process to go through, but given the pressure that the council's been under with staff in the last couple of years, I was of the opinion that if it could wait, it can wait. That's as far as I've thought through, to be honest.
I initially, I guess, had a similar feeling to Stephen of it does look like a good program. I think there's always going to be an opportunity for it to wait. Staff is a challenge for this council and every other council and almost every other industry in New Zealand, and I don't think that we can continually fall back on that. I understand the concerns around proceeding with something coming into an election, but the elected members are only one part of this council's operational business, and potentially any outcome from that could help us improve our business to a point where more people would like to come and work here as well, and maybe we can address some challenges with that too. I think that there may be a case for proceeding with this earlier than indicated in the paper.
Nigel.
I'm opposed to the idea of doing anything this year. I take the point about it being an election year. I believe the work pressure on staff, which has been extreme, will continue to. I think staff will continue to be under pressure, given the huge reform process that's happening in the local government sector. Not just with Three Waters, but with the future of local government. There's a cost factor, and while the upfront stated cash cost is 26,000, although they now recommend a two-parter. If you attempted to quantify the costs on staff time, it becomes prohibitive. So I'm lukewarm about. I'm certainly in favour of delaying it. A decision for a new council, and I know we don't know what we don't know, but I don't see any red light factors in this organisation that would want you to press the button for this process. Balanced against that, it's never of harm to. So I would certainly not be wanting to vote in favour of pressing the button on this before a new council is in place.
Okay.
And even then I'd be thinking long enough.
Sharon.
I think, I'm not against it, I think it would be very beneficial. However, I think the timing is not great, and for slightly different reasons. I know that people have said in the past that there's never going to be a right time. Fair enough, I accept that. But I think with the traffic light system that we've got, we don't know what's coming our way. We already know that there's staff short. Add the sickness where people are working from home or worried about their families, that we don't know what it's going to be like over the next few months here. And I just would not like to put the staff here and anybody else under that kind of pressure. I just think it's good spirits, but I just think it's the wrong time.
Thank you, Cheryl. Martin.
I suppose there's no good time or bad time for these sort of things, but I'm of the same mind as you. I mean, we're going into a really challenging time, and with the pressure on staff, and to achieve this is just will come back and bite us. But in saying that, I think we need to commit to doing it in a time frame which we don't push it out sort of 3 or 4 years time. We need to sort of actually commit to actually doing it, and probably after that, with the incoming new council, is probably the most opportune time to do it. So it give the staff and new councillors some very valuable information going forward into that new term. I'd like to see a commitment to that, and if it's sort of like in January 2023, could be the answer.
I think it's a good opportunity to come up with fresh eyes on our organisation, just to give us confidence that we are at the cutting edge, which we are. We might find more efficiencies that assist with workflow that helps with the staffing situation. But I too think with COVID coming at us, the timing isn't right now. I just think a wee bit further down the track. Nobody knows what's around the corner at this point in time.
Kirsty?
I'm in favour of progressing it now, or when it can be budgeted in, but I think there's an opportunity here as well. Yeah, I'm in favour of moving here.
Stuart?
I think it's total, absolute waste of time. You look at the background there, the government leadership and strategy, financial decision-making and transparency, service delivery and asset management, communicating and engaging with the public and business. We do that every meeting we're there. We've tried harder and harder to consult with our communities. What are they going to tell us? Bureaucrats can come down and say, oh, you can work on this, this, or that. Same as the audit. We go down the key parts of submission, long-term plan, business strategy surveys. We do all that anyway. So I'm in favour that we just wash it. We work hard enough trying to get that transparency out there. The media do all that, we're out there all the time. We've got a big engagement in our community. The staff do a fantastic job. So do we. Just bin it.
Neil?
It's I think that unfortunate what's driven this. But as an organisation, it was something that over the recent times had been talked about as something that was an opportunity for us to consider going forward. Much has been said about the fact is that the only reason you don't take those opportunities is because other things are deemed to be more important and more relevant. And I think if you look back over the last term of this council in particular, that what we have had to be facing with and what the staff have been dealing with and addressing has simply said this is not something that's front and centre of our minds to get on and get done. That doesn't take away from the fact that in the ideal world, you want to understand about where you sit and what you're doing and where you're going. I think it's very unfortunate that it's driven out of the perception of some about attitudes of others, which is what we've been told. And there's a part of me that always will say, having been in this organisation for quite a few years, that there are many people out there who don't like the decisions that we make. Or the decisions that we don't make, actually, as well. Or the decisions that are made by others for us that we wear the flag for. So I get the fact there's a perception. But the reality is there are ways of addressing those concerns through other channels. And some of those channels involve a lot of work for the staff as well. And particularly if it's through the ombudsman or whatever. But they are channels, and they're legitimate channels. And we shouldn't be scared of them. What's stopping me from saying that we should get on with it now is when the administrators, for the want of a better word, of Councilmark are saying to us, this is not the right time to do it, then that's to be listened to, I think. At the end of the day, this is an LGNZ administered ticking box, sorry, wrong words, process. So if the people that have designed this process are saying to us, not wise to do it in an election year for the reasons they've given, I kind of think that should be listened to. Not a reason not to do it in the future. Now, how do you address that going forward? I think that you can do it a couple of ways. You can pass some resolution to bind your future council to do something. That doesn't quite fit either, because for the same reasons that the administrators of the scheme are saying don't do it in an election year, or so close to an election in particular. How do you make sure it does get addressed? Well, it's simply we leave it on the table until the new council, so it doesn't go away. And it can come back every meeting just to remind us that it's still there, whatever. I don't know how we do that. But yeah, so that's how I've logically got to where I'm saying is that best option, and if it's my governance-wise might not be the best practice, but you leave it on the table. The new council come in, they can rattle the cage, whatever they want to do, and then they get a chance to do it. And I had the benefit of listening to all of you go first. That's not really quite fair, but it did just give me a chance to actually get my thoughts in a better structured way of saying, well, I think with what I heard, that will give us something better going forward. And it's not about winners and losers, but I think it gives a better outcome.
Thanks, Neil. Shirley.
Thank you. I'm in favour of progressing it, as I was when it was first brought to council. I think it was in 2014 in my first term. We have an opportunity to plan for it as far as the finances go in the annual plan process this year. So I'd like to see maybe that we could flag it, which then gives the new coming council the opportunity to go ahead with it if they decide and not be bound by not having the finances. And I would think maybe 3 months after, so the beginning of next year, 2023, rather than waiting for a full year when you're going to be in a long-term plan year, which puts extra pressure on the staff anyway. So yeah, I agree. That's me.
Thanks, Shirley. You've actually mirrored my thinking, is that the current alternate recommendation would put a slap bang in the middle of doing the LTP, which would be another reason not to. There's never a good time to do things like this, but potentially right now there couldn't be a worse time, is my view. And I'm not talking about election year, I don't really care about that. It's Omicron, the effect it's going to have on this organisation and the tail that it's going to have. And I'm not talking, you know, the government sort of saying, well, we might be through it by May, but how long is it going to take this organisation to catch up on how far behind it's got, because 25 to 30% or whatever of the staff aren't here, which is what we've been told to expect. It'd be like going for your physical with your doctor while you've got the heavy cold. It just wouldn't make sense. I'm going to put that into thoughts for a proposed motion, but I want to give Sanchia a chance to speak first, because obviously it has a significant impact on the running of the organisation.
Thanks, Tim. From my perspective, and we've talked about Councilmark in the past, I think review is good. I don't think there's anything bad that comes from review, because it's information, it's a tool. You find out some truths, good and bad, and some things to work on. And so I think at a philosophical level, no issue with it whatsoever. This council has participated in other similar reviews in the past. Previously, there was one out of Australia that many councils signed up to. It did, from that experience of people that were here at the time, took far more work than the program itself indicated it would. And that's been the feedback we've had from other councils in relation to Council Mark as well. I think it is reasonable that we should want to do that, to do Council Mark at some point. I don't think it's an unreasonable request, and I think staff and elected members should all want it. I also have spoken to Chief Executive of LGNZ, who mirrored the comments that Saskia received from the person she spoke to there around timing. They said election year is not the time to do it, and too soon into the new term could be problematic too, in that if you're having sort of 6 weekly meetings, you might only have had people have 2 meetings and not really have their feet under the table yet. I note, of course, too, that the beginning of January, staff are already well into the LTP, albeit it might be later in the year that you become more involved. In fact, we start before then. I think you hear I'm not going to reiterate the reasons why LGNZ recommend not doing an election year. I think we should be cautious about finding a future council, but at the same time keep it on the table. And in that regard, it may be that there's Council Mark and other reviews that you want to consider at that time, in the event that Council Mark changes or a new one comes up. So if you're looking a year down the track, I don't think you should bind yourself to this specific program, albeit at the moment this is the one we would recommend, if that makes sense. And the only other 2 things I was going to say, one is, of course, we do face significant staffing challenges here. We do the work of the large council with a much smaller staff. It is hard to get people into some roles that we have here. We are at capacity without reform, but we've had the benefit of reform as well, and also working in a COVID environment. And it's hard right now to understand what situation we are going to be in the next 6 months. And the contingency plans, we're waiting around that. So I guess what I summarise as saying is, I agree we should have it on the agenda for some point in the future. I worry about what it would mean for staff at the moment, and I guess what my question to you would be if we went ahead is, what don't we do? And we stop doing some stuff, and we're very clear on what that is, and we communicate that to the community as well, because we don't have capacity for more.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that because we don't have staff in current vacancies, or because there are not enough roles to accommodate the additional work? Or
if we had no vacancies, we would still be struggling. And if I use water reform as one example, the information we had to provide through the WICS process to get to where we've got to is about a quarter of what we'll need to provide in the next year. That's just one example. And so,
and some of the responses that are going to, RMA questionnaires, and there's 15 pages
and all of that stuff. So, yeah, so we do with work, but we don't have more staff that we have sitting in the slush lane.
No, it was just, even if we were carrying no vacancies, there would still be additional work that wouldn't get done in this period.
I think that's the conversation we have, because we haven't even staffed up for reform and everything else, and so you'd want to address that first. That said, if we held no vacancies, we're having a much more conversation, but it's stretched. It looked like, if you look at reading the media at the moment about the Great Resignation and turnover and the war for talent and all that, I'm not quite sure what this year's going to look like for every organisation across every sector. But and there's some challenges.
So here's my thinking from having heard from everybody, and thank you for that, it's very helpful. With the exception of Stu, we all think it should go ahead. The majority think it shouldn't perhaps go ahead now. That leaves me to think there's 2 paths we can go down. One, we could say now, do it, but do it in January next year for the sake of a number. It's a year from now. It's the start of the year. It gives the new council, whoever's around the table, 3 months. It does bind them, but every decision we make binds a future council in some way, shape, or form. That has the benefit of giving staff time to work out what isn't going to get done. They know that it's coming. They can get prepared. Budgets can be put in place in the annual plan. The other option is that we say essentially what's there at D at the moment, but that the CEO is to bring it back to council in the January meeting next year. So we're not binding the council.
Yeah.
That has the attraction that who knows what could happen between then and now. And if we bind council to do it, they could always tell us to get staff to come January, I suppose, but I'm more attracted to the second one simply because we've got the future for local government reforms, and if they suddenly come out in the next 12 months with a significant indication that things are going to be significantly different at the end of that term, what's the point? I think we would just have a clearer view of things, but I think that staff would have a fairly good indication through this conversation that this is likely to go ahead next, push the button next January without us having to go to the full hold of buying it. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm going to move A, B, C and D with the exception that D will be changed to the CEO to bring wording to the effect, to have a discussion on participation. Does that mean it's coming back to this people? Yeah, so keep D as it is, but just have at the January meeting instead of after a year in office, in the January 2023.
Say in the first meeting of 2023.
Yeah. Sure, first meeting of 2023, that's much better. Tracy?
The only thing about saying that it's in having another discussion is that there's been discussions and discussions and discussions.
Yep.
And actually we're not doing anything. Whether, however the decision goes, whatever gets decided, we've got to decide something. Otherwise we're going to be coming back and then the decision could be that we have to wait another 6 weeks or another 2 months. That could be halfway through the year. And maybe we need to make a decision.
I'll just pause that because I've finished where I was at. I need a seconder for my motion. And then I would say that if that motion fails, then I would put the motion that we tell the council to do it in January next year.
Sorry, I jumped again. My apologies.
Neil's got a quizzical face.
I'm waiting for you to ask the next bit.
Someone want to second
Yeah, well, no, I think we've had the discussion, need it seconded, so to have a discussion about what you're proposing, let's get it on the table.
Yeah,
So
well,
I'll
I've moved
second.
Neil second.
Right, that's all I want to do.
So now we've got a seconder. I've made it clear that if we don't want to say, let's bring it back, we'll do a process of elimination. If this is the most attractive option to you, then I suggest you vote yes. If you want to say to the council in January and you feel that you're able to say, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it in January next year, then vote against this because that'll be the next motion I'll put. We do that, that's reasonable procedure.
Council. So whatever you like, we need to get a second, there's none about it.
I thought you seconded it.
No, your fallback one you're talking about.
Oh, I see. Right.
Don't give up so easy.
I guess the third one will be we say we don't do anything. But
Say that again?
I'm trying to get a sense around the room. So I've moved that Stephen, Neil has seconded it. Further discussion on that one?
I just reiterate what Neil has said. And the organisation that runs Council Mark is telling you not to do it till next year. You look at it foolish not to do it. And I don't like your fallback. I half like what you're doing now with your fallback because I just don't believe that, we as a council can issue a directive to bind a new council that just contradicts why we're pushing it out.
I agree, that's why I thought it was my first option.
Reluctantly, I would support the motion because my fallback position would be to can it.
Appreciate it. Tracy, do you want to speak any further on where you're at?
Oh, sorry, I interrupted before, and I think that same thing stands.
No, you're good.
I see everybody else's point, but.
Any further discussion?
I think the key thing here that this does, it says this is not gone and it's not binding anybody to anything. There will be a discussion at the first meeting in January in 2023 of the new council. And between now and then, a lot can happen, which you've already talked about. And what that council then decides to do will depend on the making of that council. But I get the distinct impression if there's enough of the current ones are back, there's going to be appetite to say it's time to make this happen in some way, shape or form. And we're going to be so much better informed by then. Some announcements just been made already that are going to change the face of what we're doing going forward. And there's going to be a whole stack more of them. It's just not, the timing is just crap, and I still maintain the most salient point to that to me is when the schemes administrators are saying, don't go there. This timing's wrong. And no one here has said we should, apart from Stuart, I don't think he quite meant it that way, he was just putting his view. but no one here is that adamant that we should not do it. Stu will come round.
Okay, I've got a line up, so I've got Lindley, I've got.
Can I just,
No, I've got Lindley, I've got Shirley, then I've got Tracy. Lindley.
I just think if we wait, for the new council to decide yay or nay, they'll have missed the benefit of all the conversation that we've had. So they're going into a new council and they won't have experienced all of this conversation and our thoughts behind it. So I kind of feel like we should go with it.
Okay. Shirley. You might be on mute.
yeah, sorry, it wasn't behaving. Yeah, I would still like to flag it for the annual plan, and that shows our commitment to it.
What does finance say about that? 26 grand. I mean, do we need to have a line in there for the annual plan? If we found the budget, if the new council decides to go ahead with it?
You need to have a line in there, because I don't think we've got surpluses sitting there.
Mm.
And we'll have that conversation at what's the year who's proposed annual plan.
Right. So we don't need, it would be wrong of us to put it in now, but we'll talk about it at the workshop.
We'll have the workshop, and then when I bring back all the community board's recommendations, you've still got an opportunity to adjust your budget.
Okay, all right, that covers that. Okay, Shirley?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Tracy?
Mine was pretty much
Pretty much,
exactly
yeah.
along those same lines.
Good one. All right, no, Tamer,
I
sorry.
just have a question about the resolution. Should that first part come out? If the council was of a mind to proceed with participation, blah, 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 should it just say that the chief executive officer?
Yeah, good point. Thank you. You got that, Rebecca?
Yeah.
You?
Oh, just clearly on the other side of the page, but I just don't know what we're actually going to achieve out of it. There's a lot of reports come here that become wishy-washy, and I just think, and it's big ups to the council and the staff, the people who got here, that they can look pretty hard, but I don't know what we're going to learn that's going to be really great beneficial to our ratepayer, because I think we try pretty hard.
Very cool. Right. A motion on there, it's got a mover and a seconder. Any further discussion? In that case, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
2, 3 against. Do you want those recorded?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Was the 3 Tracy, Lindley, Tamer against?
What about Shirley?
Shirley, yeah. Were you 4 against? Sorry, Shirley, it's hard to tell.
Against.
Do you want that recorded?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So
No, that's fine. We've got Tamer, Lindley, Tracy, Shirley against.
Marriage.
Right. All right, that motion is carried. Thank you. That was a very good and helpful discussion. Righty ho, here's report. Well, as I knew it would be, it's out of date by now. We're still waiting for Omicron, but we know it's a lot closer. And as just been alluded to in the discussions, it's going to wreak havoc on the community and on the workforce of this organisation. So 2022 ahead with that, through waters reforms, resource management act reforms, and realistically, we keep saying it, but I don't think anyone keeps listening, as the resource management act reforms are bigger and more fundamental to local democracy than the water reforms in many ways. And then the future for local government discussions, this is going to be a hard year. Things are looking good around the country. They still are. I get nervous looking at the hills. They're starting to go brown occasionally and then the rain will come through. I've got a couple of firefighters here who probably look at them more nervously than I do. The housing problem remains. I don't know what we'll do about that. Summer season seems to have been very good. There seems to have been a lot of people around, but I also have spoken just in the last few days to moteliers and so forth who say that they've suffered losses again through moving to the red traffic light, particularly with warbirds not happening and so forth. And the AMP shows significant loss, just culturally in as many ways as any. I miss the AMP shows.
Me too.
Yeah, it sucks. And, you know, just thoughts though, you know, the people on those committees are having to make those hard decisions, but they're the right ones. Yeah, much choice.
Unspeakable.
Yeah. Just a bit there on the Three Waters group. I'll keep reporting back as they come. And we've got one candidate for the 2-year program at the moment still. And if there's any other people wishing to join in on that. So, any questions on that? Otherwise, I'll move my report. Tracy?
I'll second it, but I just wanted to say that it was really cool, Maria, as well, that little snippet that Stacey put on. Yeah, it was really it was cool to see that actually, and to highlight that. And I think he's going to be a great ambassador. Yeah. Actually, so. And the difference in that young man from this time last year. Yeah. Mostly through the engagement, not with me, but with other young Māori people around the country. But it's been fantastic. You see even from, you see him in where he's working and just in his body language from the start of the year to this. And I actually wondered what had happened. And until I saw him on Facebook, I didn't realise what was going on. And I actually, there's a noticeable difference. So he's a nice young man. Oh, he's a hell of a good kid. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Nothing further? All those in favour? Aye, against, carried. Thank you. Status reports, nothing of great consequence. So just the governance report, there's ratifying 3 submissions that got.
Yes. So on page 177, we've got our reports that includes our support for the Territorial Officers Forum submission on taking responsibility for our waste. Also on the economic regulation and consumer protection for the Three Waters services in New Zealand. I put in a paper of my own on that, and a submission of my own, and also the Productivity Commission on the immigration inquiry. Anyone got any comments to make on that, having read through them all, along with all the other things that we got?
No move.
No, Nigel moves, thank you. Anybody second? Thank you, Tamer. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Aye, against, carried. Committee minutes of audit and risk, I'll move that. Neil, you'll second it?
Yes.
Any discussion from anybody? All those in favour? Aye, against, carried. Next scheduled meeting is the 9th of March, so February, you get February off. And a resolution to exclude the public on the basis given on page 279 of the agenda. I'll move that. I'm sorry, going too fast.
Who did all, who did all the rest of this?
Me and Neil, yep.
I just got thrown because there's no community.
Right. I have moved the non-public and Stephen seconded it. All those in favour? Aye, against, carried. Confirmation of the confidential minutes.
Hang on, we need to stop.
Right, I'll stop. Stop. Just trying to catch up on this.
Shirley, you should